Okay, today we are tying the Pat's Rubber Legs Nymph. And we are going to start out with Semperfli wax. This is 8/0 in red. And the hook we're using today is a TMC 200R, size 12. And the bead is a 3mm matte black. We start off the thread right behind the eye of the hook. And we are going to tie in our first material. This is going to be a material called LifeFlex, and this is in black. I do like this material for legs quite a bit. It moves very nicely in the water. It's strong, does not snap very easily, at least in my experience. So we're going to tie in this material right at the front, right behind the eye. That's where we put our first wrap, and kind of adjust it as you like. I kind of like the antenna to be kind of off to the side of the eye, because when you push this bead up over the material here, once you're all done, it's gonna press up against those antennae, and if you're too straight and they're not off to the sides, it's gonna look like one big antenna. So I kind of spread them out to the sides a little bit. Go ahead and flatten that back all the way. I do this to secure it in a little bit better. You could snip this closer if you wanted to, but I do wrap back on it a little bit. And just go ahead and snip that out flush, and then kind of flatten it out. Now, the one thing here you got to remember is that bead has to fit over all this stuff. So don't get too crazy with building the bulk here, because if you do that, that bead's not going to slide over. You can test that, make sure you're not building it up by just pulling the bead up now and again, just to make sure it's just like this here, just to make sure it can slide up over there. And that looks good. If you're using a thicker thread, you definitely want to check and use very little wraps, because that won't fit. I will whip finish this off. So just a 3 or 4 turn whip finish here is fine. You can add a little dash of super glue or head cement as well, but I find that if you do use very little, because it'll create some bulk there and it's going to be hard to pull up that bead. So once you get that all done there, it's whip finished off, just go ahead and slide the bead right up. And there you go. That's the first part. Now we're going to reattach our thread right behind the bead. You could add some lead wire here if you want to add a little bit of weight, but the bead is sufficient enough for the weight, in my opinion. So go ahead and reattach your thread and wrap all the way down. I wrap just right behind the bend of the hook. You'll see here, that's where I'm going to tie in the tail part of this. And the material I'm using is the same thing. It's the black LifeFlex material. I use it for the antenna, the legs, and the tail. So same concept here. I just loop it, and it doesn't have to be completely straight on the back end, because you're going to trim these anyway. So just make sure that they're straight and they're not leaning to one side or the other, and it's nice and tight. Again, I wrap down over that loop a little bit just for more security. Like I said, you could trim that a little bit closer if you want to. I find that this helps make the body a little bit more even as well. And I take 2 wraps underneath the tail here. And remember, when you're doing that, you got to keep your thread tight. You don't want to lose tension on the thread. This helps just prop up that material just a little bit. I use that same technique on goose biots sometimes, depending on what I'm tying, or pheasant tail or anything like that. And here, we're going to go ahead and just flatten out the body a little bit. Just make sure you kind of get all that leg material covered as much as you can. I'm going to go ahead and trim just a little bit here. You can trim now. You can trim at the end. I kind of trim as I go. And I'll adjust it at the very end too. I'll just look at it and see where I want them. You can make these legs, antenna, tail, as long as you want. I try to make them proportional to the body or the size of the hook. But most of the time I just kind of eyeball it to what I like. So now we're going to start with some dubbing here at the back end, where we tied in the tail, and the dubbing we're using is This is by Upavon Fly Fishing. It's the natural hollow fiber dubbing. This is in black. I've used this before in previous videos. It is one of my favorite dubbings to use. It just noodles on the thread very nicely. So, and we're just gonna wrap up until about the mid body. You can make a little taper with this. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. When you're putting dubbing on your fly, use as little as you can, okay? Because it's easier to add more dubbing as you're going on through the fly than it is to take it off. So if you wrapped a whole big old noodle on here, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, that's way too much, it's a lot harder to back up and take that dubbing off than it would be to just add a little bit more dubbing each time. So take your time, go slow, and just add it as you need it. That's how I do it. And all dubbings are different too. Some are easier to take off. Some are very difficult to take off. So, and then I do here, I trim out some of the long fibers just because they kind of get in my way when I'm tying in the legs. But you can pick this out at the very end and make it nice and buggy. So I just kind of get rid of the long ones here. And you can use any dubbing you want. The typical Pat's rubber leg is actually made with and tied with chenille, but I didn't actually have any small chenille here, so, and I actually like tying this with dubbing. So here's the legs, same material, the black LifeFlex. We're gonna tie on the one side there. You're just gonna have to straighten this out to where you want. Sometimes it doesn't want to work with you a lot, just like any other material. You just kind of work with it. And you want to kind of make your thread flat here too. That helps because it widens out the surface area of your thread onto the material. If it's really noodled up and it's thin, it's a little bit harder to get the material attached to the hook quite like you want to. So again, move slowly when you're doing this. I'm going to tie in the other side as well. Same thing. Just try to make sure they're fairly even. You can move them around as you will before you start dubbing this. And you can even add a little glue here, head cement, to keep them in place, but I don't think that's necessary. Just make sure you just play with it, kind of get it where you want it. And these are supposed to be kind of crazy, right? The legs, but you do want them kind of even. You don't want them rolling to the bottom of the fly or to the top of the fly. So take your time, play with them. And once you kind of get them where you want them, we're just going to continue to dub up the body. And a lot of times too, though, I'll trim these legs here before I do that because I just make them a little smaller. It's a little easier to dub. And for the legs, I do kind of have a length thing. The front legs will go to the end of the antenna, and the back legs are going to go until about the end of the tail, roughly. That's kind of how I measure out the legs. But the measurements for the antenna and the tail is kind of up to you, how long you want them. Again, this is a size 12 hook, so you do want to kind of make it proportional to the hook. All right, everything there looks pretty good. So again, we're going to take that dubbing and noodle one on and continue to wrap the thorax, and we're going to continue to taper this as well. So we're gonna, and I do use dubbing wax. I use a dubbing wax by Wapsi. I actually put the wax on my fingers first and not my thread. I find it a little easier to do that. If I put on my thread, I seem to get globs of it. When I put on my fingers, it's just tacky enough where I can grab the dubbing and it noodles really nice. So you're just going to kind of weave in and out between these legs. And the legs you're going to want to kind of, depending on how you're dubbing this, if you're pulling the legs up and you're dubbing it, you may trap the leg it may be sticking straight up or straight down. You just trapped it, just back the thread out and then readjust the legs. So try to pull them back and see how they're sticking straight up like that. You can just move them down to where you want them or pull your thread back if it's not letting you move them very easily, and just readjust. Just take your time as you're moving through here. And once you get up to the bead there, just build a little more bulk to add to the taper. And then I'm using red thread too, because I'm going to make a little hot spot behind the bead. And you can use any color to do this. I like red or chartreuse. I've seen people use pink, orange. You can use any color you want, or no hot spot at all. You can also do the hot spot with the bead. Instead of using a black bead, you could use an orange, chartreuse, red bead. Again, I was just snipping out some of the long fibers there. And we're going to do just a little bit more dubbing to build this bulk. And that also sets the bead too a little bit. Like I said at the beginning, you could add some lead here behind the bead, but I don't think it's necessary. I just build that hot spot up a little bit right behind the bead. And what I'll do here is I'm going to add a head cement. This is by Loon Outdoors. This is going to be their hard head, and it's in clear. You can use super glue as well, but you'll see me add it here in just a second. And I just put it a little dab on the thread, and then I do a couple wraps, and that'll help seal the thread. Then I'll whip finish after that. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm getting that head cement ready. See, I just put a little bit on the thread. And you can do this at the end too, but I really like putting on the thread there. And there you go. It seals it all in there, soaks in the thread real nice. And then I'll go ahead and whip finish over that. And that way it's all nice and secure there. Again, you can add this at the end. You could add UV resin to it. Really, it's your preference. Do a couple whip finishes, and you're just going to go ahead and snip off the thread. Everything else is sealed. The fly is finished. You can do a little more trimming if you want to the dubbing or to the legs. Again, though, it just wouldn't be a bad idea to keep the legs, the antenna, and all that a little longer, maybe, because you can always trim it on the river, right? But you can't add more rubber to your fly when you're out there. So keep that in mind as well. And there it is. That's the black rubber legs nymph. I actually really like this fly for bass fishing, actually, believe it or not. So, and I do it in orange too. So there it is. If you guys have any questions about any techniques that were in this video, please let me know. I will try to get technique videos up as well. I'm actually working on one right now with the organza ribbon. So that'll be up soon, if not maybe the same day that this goes up. So there it is. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.